Marty, fantastic to get you on Real Vision. Great to see you.
Happy to be here.
Um, there's lots I want to talk to you about because you've had your tentacles in all sorts of things. You look at all sorts of areas. From the vampire squid days.
I've been busy.
So I'd love to hear just a bit about your backstory, your career, because you've had an incredible career. And I think that will help contextualize, why I brought you on Real Vision and some of the things that you've become an expert on this journey.
Well, I'm a computer scientist. That's how I think about myself. And sometimes people will say, well, you did this thing and then you did this other thing and you did all these different things. And what they're thinking is it sounds completely random. But they almost never say that. They'll still say something more polite. And some people will even ask, you went to medical school? Why did you do that? And the way I connect them in my mind is that I've always been doing more or less the same thing, but in different problem domains. And the same thing that I've been doing is using math and software to solve hard problems. And underneath that, there's something even more specific about using math and software, which is building a software world, an imaginary world in software that mirrors the actual world. So it's a model of the actual world. The idea being that if the model is good enough, is of high enough fidelity, then you can do experiments in that model. You can ask questions of the model that would be hard, dangerous, dumb, maybe even impossible to do in the real world. But it's only going to be useful if the model is very high fidelity. So I'm obsessed with that, right? How much software and how much math you have to build and to what level of resolution and granularity does it have to go so that the fidelity is high enough to get useful answers out of it. And actually, I got started on this, with all of us in a serendipitous way. So I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Right. And there were basically two industries: tourism and bombs. That's New Mexico, right? That's where Los Alamos Labs, where the Manhattan Project created the atomic bomb. That was in New Mexico. Sandia Laboratories, where the ordnance engineering, the missile engineering for the nuclear arsenal happened. That was in Albuquerque, my hometown. Air Force Weapons Lab, also in my hometown. And so my first summer job when I was 16 happened serendipitously at the time when the government had decided, it is very expensive and dangerous to blow up hydrogen bombs in the Nevada desert. It's upsetting a lot of people. And could we, instead of blowing up the bombs in the desert, actually simulate the bombs in software? So they bought some of the early Cray supercomputers. And that was very exciting for me as a computer geek, right? So it was an opportunity to program on a Cray 1 supercomputer. And what we were doing was literally simulating each electron coming out of the explosion of a neutron bomb. And in software, solving Maxwell's equations and tracking the movement of each electron, which would cause eventually lead to gamma rays. And the gamma rays would cause electromagnetic pulses. And the government was very concerned about that. Like, it could fry all of our communications. And yet it was very dangerous to actually drop these bombs in the Nevada desert. So we were dropping them in simulation in the Cray 1. That was my very first experience. And strange as it may sound, everything I've done since then has been a variation on that. And so I was very interested in, could you build a software model of how a physician comes up with a differential diagnosis when talking with a patient and doing lab tests on a patient? Can we do that in software? And so that got me to grad school at Stanford and an MD PhD program where we worked so hard on that But the computers were just not fast enough for us to build a high enough fidelity model. There were maybe 1,000 disease categories in general internal medicine and 10,000 findings. And the compute time was on the order of 1,000 to the 10,000th power. So it was just way more than we could actually solve. And so we all went off and were open to doing different things. And in the middle of that, I got a letter from a headhunter, and the headhunter said he'd been instructed to find entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley with PhDs in computer science from Stanford. And would I go to an interview? And I thought, well, we're not having a lot of success here. We can only solve toy problems in medical diagnosis. These people in New York seem really, really keen to solve their problems with math and software. But I didn't take it at all seriously. I thought I'll go see some shows and I'll hang out with my college friends and have some fun. And so I went out, and it was a very odd experience. I arrived at Goldman Sachs, a corner of Goldman Sachs called J. Aaron, Currency and Commodities Trading. And you might remember, I don't know if did you ever go to the J. Aaron trading floor?
Of course. So J. Aaron's legendary, right? Goldman was built, all of the fixed income, foreign exchange, everything, commodity trading legend of Goldman came out of J. Aaron.
It did. Okay, so here's my thought coming from Silicon Valley as a kid, and it's December. No. It was October of 1993. And I thought maybe someone will welcome me to Goldman Sachs, maybe give me a tour. No, someone showed up at the door of the trading floor. And my first thought when I saw the trading floor was that the carpet was torn and the furniture was ancient. And there was, you remember this, there was a coffee tasting room complete with the spittoon where you would spit out the coffee. This is vile. And the first thing the person said to me was, what do you want? The math quiz or the computer science quiz? And I was really startled because nobody told me about quizzes. And so I just said, I'll take both quizzes. And one thing led to another. And they handed me an offer letter that afternoon. And I thought, well, maybe this is the universe telling me to go to Goldman Sachs. And so I turned up at Goldman Sachs. And what was interesting to me is that there were 3 very eccentric guys in a corner office. And they were doing something that was right up my alley, which was build a piece of software that contains all the trades, all the risks, all the time series, all the models, all the reports. That way, if we're wondering where do we put it, that risk, that trade, the answer would always be the same. It was in the one place where we put everything, and then model up everything, and then design some software that could ask counterfactual sort of what if questions. What if the dollar-yen rate moved?
So this is essentially a VAR model.
Well, see, actually, we disdained VAR.
Obviously, everybody does, including me.
But we were a little bit early in the disdain, I think, in that we were working in commodities. That was my project. And what you learn about commodities is that the Six Sigma events happen every year. Right. And so VAR can't be that useful. It might be a calculation, but what we were working on, like the first sort of real meaty project I had at Goldman, was, we called it the risk of loss calculation. And it was a historical risk. It was take today's trading book over every market environment in the past. And we had about 20 years of data, and ask, how would today's trading book, if we had it back on that day in the past, what would the one-day mark-to-market have been, right? The idea being that way, at least historically, non-parametrically, we could capture these big moves that would be missing in a VAR model. And so our approach to risk was, let's do every possible risk calculation. There'll be VAR, and then there'll be some nonlinear adaptations of VAR. Then there'll be historical. Then we'll do Monte Carlo based on implied volatility. We'll do everything. and look at the worst thing that happened in all of them. And that will be our guide to risk management. So as our boss, who was not legendary at the time, but became the legendary Lloyd Blankfein, as he used to say, we do not predict the future, but we are excellent predictors of the present. Meaning in our software, this piece of software that we called SecDB, which just stood for Securities Database, we had everything that you could want to know about our business. And so this was when, well, what basically happened is because we would put businesses, first foreign exchange, then commodities, into this piece of software, we would have an excellent prediction of the present for that business. We'd be running all these simulations in the mirror world, asking about what if that thing that happened in 94, like sterling coming out of the exchange rate mechanism, what if that were to happen again in some other currency pair to today's trading book? What money might we lose? And so we would see all these bad things happening in software simulation, then come back to the present and say, well, thank goodness that didn't actually happen, but it could. And so we're going to do something about it today when there's plenty of things you can do about it, as opposed to when it's already happened and there's nothing you can do about it. And so this led to a virtuous cycle where the businesses that were modeled in this way would have better results.
So my guess is you weren't able fast enough to roll it out to fixed income because they blew up in 94, right? And everybody left J. Aaron and went to Tudor, Mark Heffernan and the whole team, right? Mark Hortonberry, all of that lot. So yeah. I guess you then probably became very important when Goldman realized they need to think about risk across everything.
One thing that would happen is adjacent businesses would blow up, or businesses at other banks would blow up, and their people would join us and we'd acquire their trading book. That happened a lot, especially in the commodities business. And over time, what people would say is, well, Lloyd, whatever you're doing there in J. Aaron, and he would say a part of the special sauce, certainly not all, but a part of it was people like me. We were called strategists, or Strat for short. So I was Strat number 12, right? And Lloyd and Armin Avanesians, who Lloyd first hired, really invented the concept. And the concept was really, it's like all great ideas, it's really obvious and simple in retrospect, but nobody else in Wall Street thought of it. And Lloyd's idea was, you can't have people off in IT outside of the business. I'm putting that in air quotes, right? So the business and IT would talk different languages and they would talk past each other. The business people couldn't write a functional software specification, and the IT people were very far away from the trading business. So Lloyd's idea is, I'm going to get a math and computer geek. That was Armin. And in those days, you went to Bell Labs to get such people. You went across the river. And I'm going to get one of them and I'm going to sit him right next to me on the trading desk. And he's going to be a trading professional. I'm going to treat him that way, not as a servant to the traders, plugging in their computers for them. And maybe this guy will figure out finally the kind of software that we need. And Armin was the one who had the brainwave. We're going to build a single piece of software that's going to have everything in it. And what we didn't know at the time was we had to invent what nowadays you call DynamoDB, a global, object-oriented, transactionally protected distributed database system. We wrote it from scratch in C. We need our own scripting language. Python didn't exist. Java didn't exist. We created our own language called Slang, which if you looked at it, you'd say, well, Python and Slang have a lot in common, right? So we built our own tools so that we could solve this problem. And this virtuous cycle worked so well that again and again, the following would happen. Some business would have a risk management problem because it missed something big, like fixed income missed the LTCM risk accumulation in 98. And then the firm would say, Lloyd, why don't you go run that business? And then Lloyd would say, I need those people like me, the strats, the math and computer geeks, and I need SecDB extended to this business. This happened again and again. Finally, it happened with the equities business.
Hey, if you like this clip, be sure to like and subscribe for more crypto-related content. Also, be sure to check out the full interview and more only on realvision.com/crypto.